30,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, the world was sleeping. The private luxury jet cut through the darkness like a silver blade, its engines humming with mechanical perfection. Inside the cabin, passengers dozed beneath cashmere blankets, their champagne glasses empty, their dreams undisturbed. Then the explosion came. A violent shudder ripped through the aircraft. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments like yellow jellyfish. The cabin lights flickered, died, and emergency strips glowed red along the floor. Screams filled the air. Jang Hyun-suk gripped his armrest, knuckles white against black leather. Through his window, he watched the left engine spew flames into the night sky. The aircraft tilted sharply, and his stomach dropped as gravity became his enemy. Across the aisle, a young Nigerian flight attendant was already on her feet. Her hands were shaking, but her voice remained steady as she guided passengers into brace positions. She moved between seats, checking buckles, offering reassurance she didn't feel. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Then the plane plunged toward the ocean. Minutes later, search and rescue teams would receive the distress signal. They would find debris scattered across miles of dark water. They would assume no one survived. They would be wrong. Because when Jang Hyun-suk opened his eyes on an isolated shore, salt water burning his lungs and sand scraping his face, the first thing he saw was her. She was leaning over him, pressing her hands against his chest, her amber-brown eyes wide with desperate hope, and neither of them knew that surviving the crash would be the easiest part. Please like, share and subscribe, and comment where you're watching from so I can see how far across the world this story has traveled. Pain was the first thing he recognized. It radiated through his body in waves. His ribs, his shoulder, the deep throbbing in his skull. Jang Hyun-suk tried to open his eyes, but the sunlight was too bright, too aggressive. He groaned and turned his head, tasting salt and blood on his cracked lips. "Don't move too quickly," a voice said above him. Female, calm, accented in a way he couldn't immediately place. "You might have internal injuries." He forced his eyes open, squinting against the glare. The face hovering above him was framed by long dark curls, tangled and wet with seawater. Her deep brown skin glistened with sweat and salt, and her amber-brown eyes studied him with a mixture of relief and worry. She was wearing what remained of an airline uniform, the white blouse torn at the shoulder, the navy skirt ripped along the hem. The flight attendant from the plane. "Where?" His voice came out as a rasp. He swallowed, wincing at the rawness in his throat. "Where are we?" "I don't know," she admitted. "An island. We washed up here about 2 hours ago. You've been unconscious since then." He tried to sit up, but pain exploded through his left side. He gasped, falling back against the sand. "I told you not to move." She pressed a gentle hand against his shoulder. "Your ribs might be broken. I can't tell for certain." Hyun-suk closed his eyes, processing. The plane, the explosion, the screaming passengers, the violent impact with water that had felt like hitting concrete. "The others," he managed. "How many survived?" Her expression flickered with something he couldn't read. "5, including you and me." 5. There had been 14 people on that aircraft. 2 pilots, 3 flight attendants, and 9 passengers. Some of the most influential business executives in Asia had been on board, flying to a private summit in Hawaii. Now only 5 remained. "Who?" he asked. "There's a Korean man, I think he was one of the pilots. An older Nigerian woman who was traveling to see her grandchildren. A younger Korean woman who hasn't spoken since we landed." She paused. "And us." Hyun-suk stared at the sky, watching clouds drift past with infuriating serenity. 24 hours ago, he had been in his Seoul penthouse, reviewing acquisition documents worth billions. He had yelled at his assistant for bringing the wrong coffee. He had fired a department head for a minor accounting error. Now he was lying on a beach, unable to stand, completely dependent on a woman whose name he didn't even know. "What's your name?" he asked. "Chisholm," she said. "Chisholm Namani." "Nigerian?" "Yes." A faint smile crossed her lips. "You sound surprised." "I'm not." He paused. I'm Jang Hyun-suk. If she recognized his name, she didn't show it. In Seoul, his name carried weight. It opened doors and closed them. It made grown men nervous and corporations tremble. Here, it meant nothing. Can you help me sit up? He asked. Chisholm hesitated, then nodded. She slid her arm behind his shoulders, supporting his weight as he slowly rose to a sitting position. The pain in his ribs made him grit his teeth, but he refused to cry out. He had built an empire on never showing weakness. He wasn't about to start now. The beach stretched before him in both directions, a curve of white sand bordered by dense tropical forest. The water was impossibly blue, almost mocking in its beauty. Debris from the crash littered the shoreline. Pieces of luggage, seat cushions, fragments of metal that had once been a $40 million aircraft. A few hundred meters away, 3 figures sat in the shade of palm trees. The pilot was easy to identify by his uniform, though it was as damaged as Chisholm's. Beside him sat an older woman wrapped in an airplane blanket, and a younger woman who stared at nothing, her arms wrapped around her knees. We need to find fresh water, Chisholm said. The pilot, his name is Kim Dae-won. He says humans can only survive about 3 days without it. Maybe less in this heat. Hyun-suk nodded slowly. Shelter. We've been using the trees for shade. But if it rains. She trailed off, the implication clear. He looked at her properly for the first time. Really looked. She was young, mid-20s, he guessed. Her uniform suggested she was relatively new to international flights, probably still working her way up from regional routes. But there was something in her posture, in the steadiness of her voice, that spoke of inner strength. She had been taking care of everyone else while he lay unconscious. How badly are you hurt? He asked. She blinked, surprised by the question. I'm fine. Some cuts and bruises, but nothing serious. Lie to me. Her jaw tightened. I'm fine, Mr. Jang. We have bigger concerns right now. He studied her for a moment longer, then let it go. She was right. Personal injuries could wait. Serve Dontival could not. Help me stand, he said. You should rest. I've rested enough. He extended his hand. Help me stand. Chisholm sighed but took his hand. Her palm was warm against his, her grip surprisingly strong. Together, they managed to get him to his feet, though he had to lean heavily on her to stay upright. The world swayed dangerously, but he forced it to stabilize through sheer willpower. Let's go meet the others, he said. They made their way across the sand slowly. Hyun-suk's arm draped across Chisholm's shoulders for support. Each step sent fresh waves of pain through his body, but he kept his expression neutral. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals with appendicitis. He could walk across a beach with bruised ribs. Kim Dae-won looked up as they approached. He was older than Hyun-suk had expected, late 40s, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades in the cockpit. His left arm was wrapped in makeshift bandages torn from someone's shirt. Mr. Jang, the pilot said, rising to his feet with difficulty. I'm relieved you survived. What happened? Hyun-suk asked without preamble. The explosion. Dae-won's expression darkened. Engine failure. Catastrophic. I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of flying. He shook his head. Captain Park did everything he could to bring us down safely, but the damage was too severe. We hit the water at nearly 200 kilometers per hour. Captain Park. He didn't make it. Dae-won's voice cracked slightly. Neither did most of the others. The impact. Some were killed instantly. Others were trapped in the wreckage. Hyun-suk absorbed this information in silence. He had known Captain Park for years. The man had been flying his private aircraft for almost a decade. They had never been friends. Hyun-suk didn't have friends, but there had been mutual respect. Now that respect would have to serve as a eulogy. Do you know where we are? He asked. Roughly. Dae-won pulled a waterlogged map from his pocket, a standard aviation emergency chart. Based on our position when we went down, I estimate we're somewhere in the Western Pacific. There are hundreds of small islands in this region, most uninhabited. Search and rescue? They would have received our distress signal before we lost power. But these waters are vast, and if the emergency beacon was damaged in the crash, he trailed off, his meaning clear. Could be days before anyone found them. Could be weeks. Could be never. Hyun-suk turned to look at the two women sitting beneath the palm tree. The older one, dark-skinned, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, watched him with quiet assessment. The younger one, Korean, continued to stare at nothing. "This is Mrs. Adaora Okonkwo," Dae-won said, gesturing to the older woman. "And Miss Yoon So-jin, Mrs. Okonkwo Mama Ifeoma," as Chisholm had apparently nicknamed her, nodded in greeting. "It is good to see you awake, young man. We were worried." So-jin didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on a point in the middle distance, empty and unseeing. Hyun-suk recognized the signs of shock. He had seen it before in business rivals who had watched their empires crumble. "Has she spoken at all?" he asked quietly. Chisholm shook her head. "Not since we reached shore. I think she was sitting next to someone who didn't survive." Hyun-suk looked at each of them in turn. The injured pilot, the wise elder, the traumatized young woman, and the flight attendant who seemed to be holding everyone together. These were his people now. Not his employees, not his subordinates, not the carefully vetted associates who populated his corporate world. Just 5 survivors on a forgotten island in the middle of nowhere. For the first time in his adult life, Jang Hyun-suk had no power, no influence, and no control. The realization was more terrifying than the crash itself. The first night was the worst. They had managed to drag enough debris from the shoreline to create a rough barrier against the wind, but it offered little real protection. The temperature dropped sharply after sunset, and the sound of the ocean became ominous rather than soothing. Every wave could be bringing something dangerous to shore. Every rustle in the forest could be a predator emerging from the darkness. Hyun-suk lay on his back, staring at unfamiliar stars through gaps in the palm fronds above. His ribs throbbed with every breath, and his shoulder had stiffened into a solid mass of pain. But physical discomfort was secondary to the chaos in his mind. Right now, back in Seoul, his absence would be causing panic. His personal assistant would be making frantic calls, trying to locate the missing aircraft. His board of directors would be convening emergency meetings. His legal team would be reviewing succession protocols they had never expected to use. And his rivals, people like Seo Jin-tae, who had spent years waiting for him to show weakness, would be circling like sharks who had scented blood. Jin-tae. The name made Hyun-suk's jaw clench involuntarily. They had known each other since university, when Jin-tae had been a brilliant student with more ambition than ethics. Their professional paths had crossed repeatedly over the years, usually ending with Hyun-suk claiming victory. But Jin-tae had never stopped trying, never stopped looking for the opportunity to finally bring his rival down. A plane crash would be that opportunity. If Hyun-suk was declared dead, or even just missing for an extended period, Jin-tae would move immediately. He would approach shareholders, spread rumors, make offers that would seem reasonable under the circumstances. By the time Hyun-suk returned, his empire could be in pieces. If he returned at all. A soft sound interrupted his thoughts. He turned his head to see Chisholm sitting a few meters away, her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes fixed on the darkness of the ocean. She wasn't sleeping. He should have ignored her, should have focused on his own concerns, his own survival. But something about the set of her shoulders, tense, determined, exhausted, made him speak. "You should rest." She startled slightly, then relaxed when she saw it was him. "So should you. I'm not the one who spent the day taking care of everyone else." A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. Someone had to. He shifted into a sitting position, wincing as his ribs protested. The movement brought him closer to her, close enough to see the fatigue etched into her features. "How long have you been a flight attendant?" he asked. She seemed surprised by the question. 3 years. International routes for the last 18 months. "Do you enjoy it?" "Sometimes." She paused, considering. "I like seeing different places, meeting different people, but it can be lonely." "Lonely? You're always moving, always in transit." It's hard to maintain relationships when you're never in the same city for more than a few days. She shrugged. But it pays well enough to help my family, so I don't complain. Your family? My mother and younger brothers. They're in Lagos. Her voice softened. My mother will be so worried. She always tells me to find a safer job, something on the ground. I always tell her planes are the safest form of transportation. The irony hung in the air between them. What about you? Chisholm asked. Do you have family who will be worried? Hyun-suk considered the question. His parents were dead. His father from a heart attack a decade ago. His mother from cancer 3 years later. He had no siblings. No wife. No children. The only people who would truly mourn his absence were those whose livelihoods depended on his continued existence. No, he said simply. No one who will be worried. Chisholm studied his face for a long moment, her amber-brown eyes reflecting starlight. That's sad, she said finally. It's practical, he corrected. Relationships create vulnerability. I can't afford vulnerability. Everyone can afford vulnerability, Mr. Jang. They just choose not to. He bristled at her tone, gentle but firm, as if she were correcting a child's misunderstanding. No one had spoken to him like that in years. People agreed with him. People deferred to him. People certainly didn't offer unsolicited opinions about his emotional availability. But before he could respond, a sound from the forest made them both freeze. Something was moving in the darkness. Branches cracked. Leaves rustled. Something large was pushing through the undergrowth, heading toward their makeshift camp. Chisholm was on her feet instantly, grabbing a piece of metal debris as a weapon. Hyun-suk tried to stand but moved too quickly, and the pain in his ribs sent him back to his knees. Stay down, Chisholm whispered. The creature emerged from the treeline. It was a wild boar. The animal was massive, easily 100 kilograms, with curved tusks that gleamed in the moonlight. It stood at the edge of the forest, snorting, its small eyes fixed on the humans who had invaded its territory. For a moment, no one moved. Then the boar charged. Chisholm threw herself to the side, narrowly avoiding the animal's initial rush. She swung her piece of metal, connecting with the boar's flank, but the blow barely seemed to register. The creature wheeled around for another charge. Over here, Daewon's voice cut through the darkness. The pilot was on his feet now, waving a flaming branch he had somehow managed to light. Get behind me! The boar hesitated, its primitive brain processing this new threat. Fire was dangerous. Fire was painful. Fire was to be avoided. But the human smell was strong, and the boar was territorial. Charged again. Daewon thrust the flaming branch forward, and the boar veered away at the last moment, squealing in anger. But the movement brought it dangerously close to where Mama Ifeoma and Sojin huddled against the debris barrier. Hyun-suk didn't think. He just moved, ignoring the screaming protest of his ribs. He grabbed the largest piece of metal he could find and stepped into the boar's path. The animal's eyes fixed on him, this new obstacle, this challenge. The boar lowered its head and charged. Time slowed. Hyun-suk could see every detail with perfect clarity. The coarse hair on the boar's back, the mud caked around its hooves, the curved tusks that could disembowel a man in seconds. He waited. At the last possible moment, he stepped aside and brought the metal down on the back of the boar's head with every ounce of strength he possessed. The animal went down. It wasn't dead. It struggled to rise, dazed and angry. But Daewon was there with the flaming branch, and Chisholm was there with her weapon, and together they drove the creature back into the forest. The entire encounter had lasted less than 30 seconds. Hyun-suk stood in the center of the camp, breathing heavily, his improvised weapon still clutched in his white-knuckled grip. His ribs felt like they were on fire, and he was fairly certain he had torn something that shouldn't have been torn. But they were alive. Chisholm approached him slowly, her eyes wide. That was incredibly dangerous. Yes, you could have been killed. Also yes, why did you do it? He looked at her. This woman he had known for less than a day, this flight attendant who had saved his life and was now questioning his choices, and found he didn't have an answer. In his corporate world, he would never have risked himself for anyone. Self-preservation was the first rule of power. You protected yourself first, always. But something had changed when he saw the boar heading toward the others. Something instinctive had taken over, pushing aside his carefully constructed walls. Because someone had to, he said finally, echoing her earlier words. Chisholm stared at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Maybe there's hope for you yet, Mr. Jang. She turned away before he could respond, going to check on Mama Ifeoma and Sojin. Hyun-suk watched her go, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It wasn't gratitude, exactly. It wasn't admiration. He didn't know what it was. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, he found himself wanting to understand. The next morning brought new challenges. Water was their most pressing concern. The tropical heat was merciless, and the survivors were already showing signs of dehydration. Cracked lips, headaches, decreased energy. If they didn't find a freshwater source soon, they would be in serious trouble. Day 1 had some basic survival training from his military service days, but his injured arm limited his mobility. Mama Ifeoma was wise and practical, but her age made extended hiking difficult. Sojin remained in her catatonic state, unresponsive to anything around her. That left Hyun-suk and Chisholm. "Are you sure you're well enough for this?" Chisholm asked as they prepared to explore the island's interior. Hyun-suk tested his ribs with a careful stretch. The pain was still there, but it had dulled to a manageable ache. "I'll survive. That's not what I asked. It's the only answer that matters." She shook her head but didn't argue. They had gathered what supplies they could find. A knife recovered from the debris, empty water bottles, strips of fabric to mark their path. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The forest swallowed them within minutes of leaving the beach. The undergrowth was thick, forcing them to move slowly and deliberately. Insects buzzed around their heads, and the humidity pressed against their skin like a physical weight. Chisholm led the way, using the knife to cut through vines while Hyun-suk followed, trying to ignore the way each step jarred his injured body. "In Nigeria," Chisholm said as they walked, "my grandmother used to tell us stories about the forest spirits. She said that when you enter unknown territory, you should ask permission first. Show respect. Do you believe that?" "I believe that respecting nature is never a bad idea." She glanced back at him. "Why? Does it seem primitive to you?" There was a hint of challenge in her voice. Hyun-suk recognized it. She was testing him, seeing how he would respond to beliefs that differed from his own. "It seems practical," he said. "Understanding your environment, approaching it with caution rather than arrogance. Those are survival instincts." Chisholm seemed satisfied with this answer. They continued walking in silence. The terrain grew more difficult as they moved inland, the ground rising into a series of small hills. By the time they reached the crest of the first ridge, they were both breathing heavily. Hyun-suk's ribs screamed in protest, but he refused to show weakness. "Look," Chisholm said suddenly, pointing. Through a gap in the trees, they could see the island spreading out below them. It was smaller than Hyun-suk had expected, perhaps 3 or 4 kilometers across, dominated by a single peak that rose from the center. The coastline curved in a rough circle, with their crash site visible as a small strip of white sand on the eastern edge. But more importantly, they could see green. Not the dark green of forest vegetation, but the lighter, brighter green of water plants. A small stream wound through a valley below them, catching the sunlight in silver flashes. "Water," Chisholm breathed. They half walked, half slid down the hillside, caution forgotten in their urgency. The stream was shallow, barely ankle-deep, but it was fresh. Hyun-suk cupped his hands and drank deeply, not caring about parasites or contamination. Pure hydration flooded his parched tissues, and he nearly moaned with relief. Chisholm knelt beside him, filling the empty bottles they had brought. "We can't carry enough back for everyone. We'll need to make multiple trips, or move the camp closer to the water source." She considered this. "The beach has the wreckage. We might need those materials. So we established 2 locations, a base camp near the water and a salvage site on the beach." Chisholm looked at him with something approaching respect. You've thought about this. It's logistics. I've built my career on logistics. Building companies and building survival camps are different things. Not as different as you'd think. He stood, wiping water from his chin. Both require assessing resources, allocating them efficiently, and adapting to unexpected obstacles. And controlling people? The question was sharper than her previous comments. Hyun-suk met her eyes, trying to read her expression. I don't control people, he said carefully. I direct them. Is there a difference? Direction provides purpose. Control removes it. He paused. I give people the opportunity to excel. If they can't meet the standard, that's not my failure. It's theirs. Chisholm was quiet for a moment. Then she said, and if the standard is impossible? If you've set expectations no one can meet, then I find people who can. Or you could adjust the expectations. Why would I do that? She shook her head, a small, sad smile crossing her face. Because sometimes, Mr. Jang, the strongest thing a leader can do is admit that perfection isn't possible. That good enough is acceptable. That people are more than their productivity. That's a nice philosophy, Hyun-suk said. But it doesn't build empires. No, Chisholm agreed. But it builds relationships. And right now, relationships are the only thing keeping us alive. She walked past him, heading back toward the beach, leaving him standing alone beside the stream with her words echoing in his mind. The days that followed established a brutal routine. Morning was for foraging, searching the beach for edible seaweed, checking the traps Day One had constructed from debris. Midday was for rest, hiding from the worst of the tropical heat in whatever shade they could find. Afternoon was for labor, building better shelters, improving their water collection system, exploring new parts of the island. Evening was for stories. Mama Ifioma insisted on this ritual. In my village, she said on the third night, we believe that sharing stories keeps the spirit strong. It reminds us of who we are, where we come from, what we are fighting to return to. She told tales of growing up in rural Nigeria, of village festivals and extended families, of wisdom passed down through generations. Chisholm shared memories of her brothers, of her mother's cooking, of the chaos and love of a Lagos childhood. Day One spoke of flying, the first time he had been in a cockpit, the pride of earning his wings, the thousands of hours spent watching the world from above. Even Seo-jin eventually broke her silence, her voice barely a whisper as she described her work as an accountant, her small apartment in Busan, her cat who would be wondering where she had gone. Everyone shared except Hyun-suk. He listened to their stories with careful attention, cataloging details, analyzing personalities. It was a habit from decades of business dealings. Information was power, and people revealed themselves when they thought they were just talking. But when it came time for him to share, he deflected, changed the subject, made excuses about being tired or needing to check the perimeter. After a week of this, Chisholm confronted him. You never talk about yourself, she said. They were gathering firewood together, moving through the forest in what had become their routine patrol. There's nothing interesting to tell. I don't believe that. Why do you care? The question came out harsher than he intended, and he saw her flinch. But she recovered quickly, her expression hardening. Because we're stuck on this island together. Because trust is what keeps groups like ours from falling apart. Because every night, the rest of us share our souls, and every night, you sit there like a statue, giving nothing. I don't owe you my personal history. No, she agreed. But you might want to consider why you're so determined to withhold it. She walked away, leaving him with an armful of branches and a growing sense of discomfort. That night, as the fire crackled and the stars wheeled overhead, Hyun-suk spoke. My father built the foundation of what became my company, he said, his voice barely audible above the ocean waves. He started with nothing, a small electronics repair shop in Incheon. He worked 18-hour days, saved every one, invested everything back into the business. The others had fallen silent, sensing the significance of this moment. When I was 15, he suffered his first heart attack. The doctors said he needed to slow down to reduce stress. He refused. He said the company was his legacy, and he would rather die building it than live watching it stagnate. Hyun-suk stared into the flames, seeing his father's face in the dancing light. He got his wish. He died at his desk, reviewing quarterly reports, when I was 22. I inherited everything, the company, the debts, the impossible standards he had set. Everyone expected me to fail. I was too young, too inexperienced, too soft. What did you do? Chisholm asked quietly. I became exactly what they feared I couldn't be. I removed the softness, eliminated the weakness, built walls so high that no one could ever hurt me again. The silence stretched. Mama Ifeoma reached over and placed her weathered hand on Hyun-suk's arm. Walls keep pain out, she said gently, but they also keep love in. A man cannot live forever behind walls, my son. The heart was not made for isolation. Hyun-suk didn't respond, but later that night, when everyone else had fallen asleep, he saw Chisholm watching him from across the dying fire. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. 2 weeks into their ordeal, the storm came. They had noticed the signs earlier that day. The darkening sky, the increasing wind, the strange stillness in the forest that preceded violent weather. Day 1, with his pilot's experience, had been the first to raise the alarm. This is going to be bad, he said, studying the horizon. Pacific typhoons can be incredibly destructive. We need to find better shelter. They had constructed a lean-to near the freshwater stream, but it was built for shade, not protection. Against serious wind and rain, it would be useless. There were caves, Chisholm said, on the north side of the island. I saw them during one of our explorations. How far? Hyun-suk asked. Maybe an hour's walk. Less if we move quickly. He looked at the sky, calculating. The storm was approaching fast. They might have 2 hours before it hit, maybe 3 if they were lucky. An hour to reach the caves. Time to secure their position. We need to leave now, he said. Everyone gather what you can carry. Essential supplies only. For once, no one questioned his authority. They moved through the forest in single file, Hyun-suk leading the way while Chisholm brought up the rear. The wind was already picking up, bending palm trees and sending debris swirling through the air. So-jin stumbled frequently, still weak from her weeks of psychological withdrawal, and Daewon's injured arm made climbing difficult. But they pressed on. The caves were exactly as Chisholm had described. A series of openings in a limestone cliff on the island's northern shore. The largest was perhaps 3 meters wide and extended deep into the rock, offering genuine protection from the elements. Inside, quickly, Hyun-suk ordered as the first drops of rain began to fall. They made it just in time. The storm hit with the force of a freight train, wind screaming past the cave entrance, rain falling in sheets so thick it looked like a solid wall of water. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed immediately by thunder that shook the ground beneath their feet. Mama Ifeoma began to pray softly in Igbo, her eyes closed, her hands clasped. So-jin curled into a ball against the cave wall, trembling. Daewon sat near the entrance, watching the chaos outside with professional fascination. Chisholm moved to sit beside Hyun-suk, their shoulders almost touching in the confined space. This is terrifying, she admitted quietly. Yes. Are you afraid? He considered the question honestly. Not of the storm. I'm afraid of what comes after. What do you mean? Every day we spend here is a day my enemies grow stronger. A day my company moves further from my control. A day I become more irrelevant. Is that really what you're afraid of? Becoming irrelevant. He turned to look at her. In the dim light of the cave, her face was all shadows and curves, her amber-brown eyes reflecting the occasional flash of lightning. For 20 years, he said, my identity has been defined by power. Without it, I don't know who I am. Maybe, Chisholm said slowly, that's exactly what you need to discover. The storm raged for 6 hours. When it finally passed, they emerged to find their island transformed. Trees had been uprooted, debris scattered across every surface, their lean-to completely destroyed. But they were alive. And something between Hyun-suk and Chisholm had shifted. It wasn't obvious. There was no dramatic revelation, no sudden confession. But in the days that followed, they found themselves gravitating toward each other. He sought her out during foraging expeditions. She sat closer to him during evening stories. When they spoke, the sharpness had softened into something gentler. Mama Ifioma noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "That young woman cares for you?" she told Hyun-suk one afternoon as they worked on rebuilding their shelter. "She barely tolerates me." Mama Ifioma laughed. A warm, rich sound that seemed to echo across the beach. "Men, so intelligent in business, so foolish in matters of the heart. Open your eyes, my son. She looks at you the way the sun looks at the earth, always drawn back, no matter how far it seems to travel. You're romanticizing. I am observing. There is a difference." She placed a hand on his arm. "Do not make the mistake of believing that strength requires solitude. The strongest trees grow in groves, supporting each other against the wind. A single tree, no matter how mighty, can be uprooted. But a forest endures." He wanted to dismiss her words as sentimental nonsense. But they lingered in his mind long after she had walked away. That evening, he found Chisholm sitting alone on the beach, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "May I join you?" he asked. She looked up, surprised by his formality. "Of course." He lowered himself to the sand beside her, moving carefully to protect his still healing ribs. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The waves rolled in and out with their eternal rhythm, and the sky slowly darkened from gold to purple to deep blue. "I've been thinking," Hyun-suk said finally, "about what you asked me, about why I hide behind walls." Chisholm turned to face him. "And I think I was afraid, not of being hurt. I've been hurt before and I survived. I was afraid of caring, of letting someone matter to me, because when someone matters, they have power over you. And I've spent my entire adult life trying to ensure that no one has power over me. That sounds exhausting." "It is." He paused. "But I don't know how to be any other way." Chisholm was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm against his, her grip gentle but firm. The contact sent an unexpected shock through his system. Not physical attraction, though there was that too. Something deeper. Something that felt like connection. "When I was 12, she said, "my father left. He just woke up one morning and walked away. No explanation. No goodbye. One day he was there, and the next he wasn't. I'm sorry. I spent years being angry. At him, at my mother for not stopping him, at myself for not being enough to make him stay. I built walls too, Mr. Jang. I convinced myself that I didn't need anyone, that I could survive alone. What changed? I watched my mother." Chisholm's voice softened. She had every reason to close herself off, to protect herself from ever being hurt again. But instead, she opened herself wider. She poured love into my brothers and me. She built a community of women who supported each other. She chose vulnerability over safety. And that worked for her? It wasn't easy. Still isn't. But she's happy, Mr. Jang. Genuinely happy. Not the kind of happiness that comes from achievements or possessions, but the kind that comes from knowing you're not alone in the world. Hyun-suk looked down at their joined hands, trying to process what he was feeling. It was unfamiliar territory, this warmth in his chest, this desire to stay in this moment forever. "I don't know how to be vulnerable," he admitted. "I've forgotten, or maybe I never learned." "Then learn now." Chisholm squeezed his hand. "We might be stuck on this island for a long time, or we might be rescued tomorrow. Either way, doesn't it make sense to practice being human while you have the chance?" He wanted to argue, to retreat behind his familiar defenses. But something in her eyes stopped him. Hope. She was looking at him with hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the quieter hope of connection, of possibility, of something that might grow between two people if given the chance. Against every instinct he had cultivated over 2 decades, Jang Hyun-suk decided to try. "Okay," he said. "Teach me." The days that followed were different. Hyun-suk found himself actively participating in the community they had built. Not directing from a distance, but working alongside the others as an equal. He helped Day-won repair fishing equipment, learned traditional Igbo songs from Mama Ifeoma, slowly drew Sojin out of her shell with patient conversation. And he talked to Chisholm. They talked about everything. Their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. She told him about her brothers, about her mother's restaurant, about the joy of watching the world from 30,000 feet. He told her about the pressure of being an only child, about the weight of expectations, about the loneliness of wealth without purpose. They disagreed on almost everything: politics, philosophy, the proper way to cook fish. But the disagreements felt different now. Not like battles to be won, but like conversations to be continued. "You're changing," Chisholm observed one afternoon as they gathered fruit from a grove they had discovered. "Is that bad?" "I don't know yet," she smiled. "Ask me again in a few weeks." He wanted to kiss her. The realization hit him suddenly, unexpectedly, as she turned away to reach for a high branch. Sunlight caught her hair, creating a halo of dark curls around her face. Her skin glowed with health despite their difficult circumstances, and her movement was graceful in a way that made his chest tighten. He wanted to kiss her, but he didn't. Not because he was afraid, though he was more than he had been afraid of anything since his father's death, but because he understood that some things needed time. That trust, real trust, couldn't be rushed. So he waited, and the feelings grew. A month after the crash, they had their first real argument. It started over something trivial: the placement of their food storage, or maybe the rotation of night watch duties. Hyun-suk couldn't even remember the specific trigger. What he remembered was the escalation, the way years of careful restraint had suddenly shattered. "You don't listen," Chisholm shouted, her voice carrying across the beach. "You think you know everything, but you don't. This isn't your boardroom. I never said it was. No, you just act like it is. Making decisions without consulting anyone, assuming you always know best. Someone has to make decisions." "Yes. And sometimes that someone shouldn't be you." The others had retreated, giving them space. Even Mama Ifeoma, who usually intervened in conflicts, had quietly led Sojin and Daewon away. Hyun-suk felt the familiar urge to withdraw, to end the conversation, to retreat behind his walls. It would be so easy. He had done it 1,000 times before. But he remembered Chisholm's words about vulnerability, about choosing connection over safety. He took a breath. "You're right." Chisholm blinked, her anger faltering. "What?" "You're right. I've been making decisions without consulting the group. It's what I know. It's how I've operated for 20 years. But that doesn't make it correct. Not here. Not with people who aren't my employees." She stared at him, clearly expecting a different response. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I need to learn a new way, and I need your help to do it." He paused. "I need you to keep calling me out when I fall back into old patterns. Can you do that?" Slowly, the tension drained from Chisholm's shoulders. "That's very mature of you. Don't sound so surprised." A reluctant smile tugged at her lips. "I'm not surprised. I'm just impressed. Because I admitted I was wrong? Because you admitted it to me." She stepped closer. "Do you have any idea how difficult it is to get you to acknowledge imperfection?" "I'm becoming aware." They stood facing each other, the argument forgotten. Something new and fragile growing in the space between them. The air felt charged, heavy with possibility. "Mr. Jang." "Hyun-suk," he interrupted. "I think we've been through enough together for you to use my name." "Hyun-suk." She tested the word, and he found himself liking the way it sounded in her voice. "I want you to know something." "What?" "When we first crashed here, I thought you were the most arrogant, entitled man I had ever met. That seems fair. But you're not." She met his eyes. "Or at least that's not all you are. There's something underneath the armor. Something worth knowing. And now I think." She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I think I want to know what else is underneath. If you'll let me." It was an invitation, a door opening. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Jang Hyun-suk walked through. "I would like that," he said softly. "Very much." Their first kiss happened 3 days later. It was evening, the sun setting over the ocean in a spectacular display of color. They had been walking along the beach, discussing nothing in particular, when Chisholm stopped suddenly. "Look," she said, pointing toward the water. A pod of dolphins was moving through the shallows, their sleek bodies catching the fading light. They leaped and dove in what looked like pure joy, their calls carrying across the still air. "They're beautiful," Chisholm whispered. Hyun-suk wasn't looking at the dolphins. He was looking at her, at the way the sunset painted her skin in shades of gold and amber, at the wonder in her eyes, the genuine delight that had nothing to do with money or status or power, at the curve of her smile, the shape of her lips. "Chisholm." She turned to him, and something in his expression must have told her what was coming, because her breath caught. "Yes." He cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the softness of her skin, the warmth that radiated from her. "Tell me to stop and I will." "I don't want you to stop." He kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, questioning. But when she responded, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, something broke free inside him. Years of control, years of isolation, years of convincing himself he didn't need this. All of it crumbled in the face of her warmth. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing heavily, the sun had disappeared beneath the horizon. "That was," Chisholm started. "Overdue," he finished. She laughed, and the sound was better than any symphony, any closing bell, any achievement he had ever accomplished. "Very overdue," she agreed. They walked back to camp hand in hand, and if the others noticed the change between them, the lingering glances, the secret smiles, they had the grace not to comment. But Mama Ifeoma caught Hyun-suk's eye as he passed her, and her knowing smile said everything. "I told you so." The days that followed were the happiest of Hyun-suk's life. He didn't know how to process that realization. He had experienced satisfaction before, closing successful deals, crushing competitors, seeing his company's value increase. But happiness? True, uncomplicated happiness? Not since childhood. Maybe not ever. Yet here, on a desert island with minimal resources, physical discomfort, and no certainty of rescue, he had found something that had eluded him for decades. He had found peace. He woke each morning looking forward to seeing Chisholm's face. He fell asleep each night reviewing their conversations, treasuring every smile she had given him. He found himself noticing beauty that had always existed but that he had been too busy to see. The way morning light filtered through palm fronds, the complex patterns in seashells, the infinite variations of blue in the ocean. "You're different," Dae-won observed one day as they worked on improving their fishing equipment. "Lighter, somehow." "I'm the same person I've always been." "No," the pilot shook his head. "You're the person you were supposed to be before life got in the way." Hyun-suk wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because Dae-won was right. Somewhere along the way he had lost himself. The boy who had dreamed of building things, of creating value, of making the world better. That boy had been buried beneath decades of corporate warfare, replaced by a machine that knew only competition and dominance. The island had stripped away the machine, and underneath, the boy still existed. 6 weeks after the crash, Hyun-suk faced a moment of truth. He and Chisholm were exploring a section of the island they hadn't visited before, a rocky promontory on the western shore. The terrain was difficult, requiring careful climbing over slippery boulders and through narrow passages. "Are you sure you want to continue?" Chisholm asked, noting his heavy breathing. His ribs had mostly healed, but the exertion was still challenging. "I'm fine." "You always say that." "Because it's always true." She rolled her eyes but didn't push further. They continued climbing. The view from the top was worth the effort. The entire island spread out below them, green and gold and blue, a perfect jewel in the vast Pacific. From this height, they could see the curvature of the horizon, the endless expanse of water stretching to infinity. "It's incredible," Chisholm breathed. Hyun-suk pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned into him, and for a moment, they simply existed, two people against the vastness of the world, finding meaning in each other. "When we're rescued," he said quietly, "everything will change." She tensed slightly. "I know. My life in Seoul. It's complicated. There will be expectations, judgment, people who will question why a man like me would be with someone like you." Chisholm pulled away, turning to face him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I don't care." He took her hands in his. "I'm saying that whatever happens when we leave this island, I want you with me. Not as a footnote, not as a temporary arrangement, as my partner. My equal. Hyun-suk. I know it won't be easy. My world is brutal, and it will try to tear you apart. But I've spent my entire life being afraid of vulnerability, and look where it got me. Alone, empty, so focused on building an empire that I forgot to build a life." He reached up to touch her face, brushing away the tears that had begun to fall. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," he said. "I want to be brave. And being brave means choosing you, no matter what anyone else thinks." "You're a billionaire," Chisholm whispered. "I'm a flight attendant. The world will never understand." "The world doesn't have to understand. The only people who have to understand are the two of us." She was silent for a long moment, her amber-brown eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt, any hint of insincerity. She found none. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, I'm with you. Whatever comes next, I'm with you." He kissed her then, there on the promontory with the world spread out beneath them, and the future felt less like a burden and more like a promise. They had no way of knowing that everything was about to change. The helicopter appeared on the 43rd day. It came from the east, a small black dot that grew larger with each passing second. At first, Hyun-suk thought it was a bird, a large seabird, perhaps, riding the thermal currents. But the sound was wrong, mechanical rather than natural. "Everyone," Day-one shouted from his lookout position. "Everyone! It's a helicopter!" They scrambled from their various tasks, rushing toward the beach. The signal fire they had maintained for weeks was already burning, but they added more fuel, creating a column of smoke that rose high into the morning sky. The helicopter altered course. It was heading directly toward them. Hyun-suk felt Chisholm's hand slip into his, her fingers interlacing with his own. He squeezed tightly, unable to speak around the emotion clogging his throat. They were going to be rescued. After 43 days of uncertainty, of fear, of learning to survive in an environment that wanted them dead, they were finally going home. The helicopter landed on the beach, rotors kicking up sand that stung their eyes and coated their skin. A man in a bright orange jumpsuit emerged, followed by a second man with a medical kit. "Are you the survivors from the Jang Aerospace incident?" The first man shouted over the noise of the engine. "Yes," Day-one shouted back. 5 survivors. Minor injuries only." The rescue workers moved efficiently, assessing each survivor and helping them into the helicopter. Medical checks, identification confirmation, basic questions about their physical and mental state. Hyun-suk was the last to board. Before he stepped into the helicopter, he turned to look at the island one final time. The beach where they had washed up, the forest where they had found water, the caves that had sheltered them from the storm, the place where he had fallen in love. "Sir," the rescue worker touched his arm. "We need to go." Hyun-suk nodded, climbing into the helicopter and taking a seat beside Chisholm. She leaned against him, exhausted and overwhelmed, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. As the helicopter lifted off, the island grew smaller beneath them, a green jewel disappearing into the infinite blue of the ocean. "It's over," Chisholm whispered. Hyun-suk looked at her, at this woman who had saved his life in more ways than one, and felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. "No," he said, "it's just beginning." But as the helicopter carried them toward civilization, neither of them knew what was waiting for them when they landed. They didn't know that Seo Jin-tae had spent the past 6 weeks systematically dismantling Hyun-suk's empire. They didn't know that the board of directors had declared him legally dead. They didn't know that the world Hyunsuk had left behind no longer existed. They didn't know that the real battle for their future was about to begin. And they certainly didn't know that the hardest test of their love was still to come. The helicopter touched down in Seoul 14 hours later, after a series of layovers and transfers that blurred together in Hyunsuk's exhausted mind. By the time they reached the private airfield, word of his survival had spread through the business world like wildfire. Cameras flashed the moment the helicopter doors opened. Reporters shouted questions in a cacophony of Korean, English, and Chinese. Security personnel struggled to maintain a perimeter against the surging crowd. Hyunsuk stepped out first, shielding Chisholm behind him. He had prepared himself for a reception, but the scale of the media circus exceeded his expectations. Mr. Jang, is it true you were the only survivor? Can you comment on the rumors that the crash was deliberate sabotage? Mr. Jang, what are your plans for reclaiming your company? He said nothing, his face a mask of controlled neutrality as he guided Chisholm toward the waiting car. The other survivors had been directed to different vehicles, their reunions with family happening away from the chaos. Inside the car, with tinted windows blocking the flashes, Hyunsuk finally allowed himself to breathe. That was intense, Chisholm said, her voice shaky. Welcome to my world. She looked at him, and he saw the fear in her eyes. Not of him, but of everything that surrounded him. The power, the scrutiny, the relentless pressure that came with being connected to one of Asia's most prominent businessmen. I'm right here, he said, taking her hand. I'm not going anywhere. I know, but her voice wavered. It's just different, seeing it in person. It's overwhelming at first, but you'll adjust. Will I? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. One of the rescue team members had returned his device, retrieved from the wreckage, and despite the water damage, his technical team had managed to restore basic functionality during the transfer flights. The screen showed 847 unread messages and 312 missed calls. He ignored them, but one notification caught his eye. A news alert, time-stamped from the previous day. SEO Jin-tae appointed interim CEO of Jang Technologies. Hyunsuk's blood ran cold. Jin-tae. He opened the article, scanning rapidly. The board of directors, convinced by Jin-tae's testimony and facing pressure from shareholders, had voted to install him as interim leadership 3 weeks ago. The legal declaration of death was being fast-tracked. Major contracts were being renegotiated. Key executives were being replaced. His empire was being stolen from him in plain sight. Hyunsuk. Chisholm's voice cut through his rage. What's wrong? Everything. He showed her the screen. Jin-tae has taken over my company. Can he do that? He's doing it. His jaw tightened. The question is whether I can stop him. The car pulled through the gates of his Seoul compound, past security checkpoints that seemed surprised to see him alive. The estate was exactly as he remembered. Pristine gardens, immaculate architecture, the kind of perfection that only unlimited money could maintain. Felt foreign now. Cold. Empty. This is your home? Chisholm asked, staring at the massive structure. It's my residence. I've never been sure it's a home. She was quiet as they exited the car, allowing him to lead her inside. The staff had been alerted to his return, and a line of employees waited in the entrance hall, their faces showing various degrees of shock and relief. Mr. Jang, his head housekeeper, Mrs. Kim, stepped forward, tears streaming down her weathered face. We thought. We believed. I know. He felt something soften at her obvious emotion. I know. It's good to see you too, Mrs. Kim. We have prepared your suite. And... She hesitated, glancing at Chisholm with poorly concealed curiosity. We weren't sure about accommodations for your guest. Ms. Namani is a close personal friend. She will be staying in the East Wing suite. If Mrs. Kim found this unusual, she kept her thoughts to herself. Of course, sir. I'll see to it immediately. As the staff dispersed, Hyunsuk turned to Chisholm. I need to make some calls. Handle some urgent business. Will you be all right? I'll be fine. She managed to smile. Go save your empire. He kissed her briefly, aware of the watching eyes and not caring. Then he headed toward his study, his mind already churning with strategy. Jin-tae had 6 weeks head start. Hyun-suk intended to make up that time in hours. The next 72 hours were a blur of activity. Phone calls, meetings, legal consultations, media appearances. Hyun-suk operated on minimal sleep and maximum determination, systematically dismantling the framework Jin-tae had constructed during his absence. It wasn't easy. Jin-tae had been clever, devastatingly clever. He had leveraged the ambiguity of Hyun-suk's status to make changes that would be difficult to reverse. Key alliances had been formed, contracts signed, money moved in ways that left trails but no clear evidence of wrongdoing. He didn't steal your company, one of his lawyers explained during a late-night briefing. He's attempting a legal takeover, using the circumstances of your presumed death. Now that you're confirmed alive, the process becomes more complicated for him. But it's not impossible. What are my options? The board is split. Half remain loyal to you. Half have been swayed by Jin-tae's promises. You'll need to win back the undecided members to force a vote that restores your full authority. And Jin-tae. He's scheduled an emergency shareholders meeting for next week. If he can demonstrate that the company performed better under his leadership, or that your return creates instability, he might be able to make the interim appointment permanent. Hyun-suk leaned back in his chair, processing. The old version of himself would have met this challenge with ruthless aggression, deploying every weapon in his arsenal to destroy Jin-tae completely. But he wasn't the old version of himself anymore. Schedule a meeting with Jin-tae, he said. Just the two of us. Tomorrow morning. His lawyer looked surprised. Sir, that's highly unorthodox, given the adversarial nature of the situation. I know. Schedule it anyway. When the lawyer left, Hyun-suk stared out the window of his study, watching the lights of Seoul spread out below him like a galaxy of possibilities. Somewhere in the East Wing, Chisholm was sleeping. She had been patient with his absence, understanding the urgency of his situation, but he knew she was struggling. His world was overwhelming her, and he was barely there to help. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in. It was Chisholm, wrapped in one of his robes, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked small in the doorway of his massive study, like a visitor from another world. I couldn't sleep, she said. I thought you might still be awake. I am. She walked into the room, her bare feet silent on the polished floor, and curled up in the chair across from his desk. How's the battle going? It's complicated. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion catching up with him. Jin-tae has been thorough. Unraveling his work will take time. Do you have time? I'll make time. Chisholm was quiet for a moment, studying him in the dim light. You look tired. I am tired. Then why are you still working? Because if I stop, everything falls apart. Everything. She raised an eyebrow. Or just the things that matter to you more than sleep? He started to argue, then stopped. Because she was right. He was falling into old patterns, sacrificing his health, his relationships, his sanity for the sake of corporate victory. The island had taught him different priorities, but old habits died hard. I don't know how to do this differently, he admitted. You could start by coming to bed. The suggestion was simple, but it carried weight. He looked at her, this woman who had crossed the ocean with him, who had saved his life in more ways than one, and felt the familiar pull of her presence. The problems will still be here in the morning, Chisholm continued. But right now you need rest. And I need. She paused, vulnerable. I need you to remember that I'm here, that I matter too. Hyun-suk stood, walked around the desk, and pulled her to her feet. You always matter, he said. Always. Don't ever doubt that. He kissed her, and the kiss became something more. A promise, a reaffirmation of everything they had built together on that distant island. When they finally pulled apart, his exhaustion had transformed into something warmer. Come on, he said, taking her hand. You're right. Everything else can wait until morning. They walked together through the silent hallways of his too-large house, and for the first time since returning to Seoul, Hyun-suk felt like he was home. The meeting with Jin-tae took place in a neutral location, a private room at a hotel neither of them owned. Jin-tae arrived first, which surprised Hyun-suk. Usually, his rival preferred making others wait. Hyun-suk. Jin-tae rose from his chair, a smile plastered across his handsome face. I'm so relieved you survived. When I heard about the crash, I was devastated. I'm sure you were. They sat across from each other, the table between them like a battlefield. Jin-tae was exactly as Hyun-suk remembered. Polished, confident, with the easy charm that masked a predator's instincts. His suit was impeccable, his hair perfectly styled, his demeanor that of a man holding all the cards. So, Jin-tae said, pouring tea with elaborate ceremony, I imagine you've been briefed on the current situation. I have. Then you understand that the company has flourished under my guidance. Profits are up 12%. Stock value has increased. Employee morale is at an all-time high. All achieved by leveraging uncertainty about my status to force through changes that would have been blocked otherwise. Jin-tae's smile didn't waver. Opportunity presents itself in many forms. A good businessman recognizes it when it comes. A good businessman, an honest businessman would have respected the established chain of succession. Please, Jin-tae waved dismissively. Don't lecture me about honesty. We both know what you've done to build your empire. The rivals you've destroyed, the careers you've ended, the lives you've ruined in pursuit of victory. You and I are the same, Hyun-suk. We just wear different masks. Hyun-suk leaned back, studying his rival. Perhaps we were the same. Once. And now I'm not sure. Jin-tae laughed. Don't tell me your little island adventure has softened you. Did you find enlightenment among the coconuts? Fall in love with your reflection in a tide pool. I fell in love, Hyun-suk said simply. But not with my reflection. The laughter died in Jin-tae's throat. I heard rumors. Something about a flight attendant you brought back with you. Nigerian, isn't she? How exotic. Be very careful about your next words. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Jin-tae, for all his bravado, recognized danger when he saw it. He adjusted his approach accordingly. I meant no offense. Truly. He spread his hands. I'm simply surprised. The Jang Hyun-suk I knew would never let personal entanglements interfere with business. The Jang Hyun-suk you knew almost died on a desert island. He leaned forward. That tends to clarify one's priorities. So what are you proposing? A truce? Partnership? A gentleman's agreement to carve up the company between us? No. Hyun-suk shook his head. I'm proposing you step down voluntarily, accept a generous severance package, and disappear from my business sphere forever. Jin-tae stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed again, though this time there was an edge to it. That's absurd. I have the board's support. I have shareholder confidence. I have momentum. You have 6 weeks of borrowed authority built on the assumption that I was dead. I am not dead. I am sitting in front of you, very much alive, and I am offering you an exit that preserves your dignity and your fortune. And if I refuse, then I stop being generous. Hyun-suk's voice hardened. I deploy every resource I have, and I have many, Jin-tae, resources you don't even know exist, to expose every questionable decision you've made since taking power. The contracts that violated ethical guidelines. The personnel changes that were actually old grudges being settled. The financial maneuvers that, while technically legal, would destroy your reputation if made public. Jin-tae's smile finally cracked. You're bluffing. I never bluff. I leave that to people who lack the conviction to follow through. They stared at each other across the table, two predators assessing the odds. Hyun-suk could see Jin-tae's mind racing, calculating risks and rewards, searching for an angle that would save his position. He wouldn't find one. 1 week, Jin-tae said finally. Give me 1 week to organize a transition that doesn't destroy my career. You have 3 days. That's not enough time. 3 days. Hyun-suk stood. After that, my offer expires and we do this the hard way. Your choice. He walked out of the meeting without looking back, his heart pounding with adrenaline. The confrontation had gone better than expected. Jin-tae was a coward at heart, more interested in preserving what he had than risking it for more. Given a face-saving exit, he would likely take it. But Hyun-suk knew better than to count on his rival's rationality. Jin-tae was unpredictable when cornered, and wounded pride could make people do desperate things. He would need to stay vigilant, and he would need to protect Chisholm from whatever retaliation might come. The next 3 days were a delicate dance of corporate maneuvering. Hyun-suk met with key board members, reassuring them of his fitness to lead and outlining his vision for the company's future. He addressed shareholder concerns through careful public statements. He positioned himself as a survivor, both literally and figuratively, who had emerged from disaster with renewed clarity and purpose. The narrative played well with the media. Billionaire returns from the dead read the headlines. Jang Hyun-suk, the man who beat the ocean. The public, always hungry for dramatic stories, embraced his survival tale with enthusiasm. But Chisholm remained in the shadows, and that was starting to cause problems. People are asking questions, his PR director warned during a strategy meeting. The woman who returned with you, the Nigerian flight attendant. Rumors are circulating. What kind of rumors? The usual. Gold digger. Opportunist. Someone who saw a chance to attach herself to a wealthy man and took it. Hyun-suk felt his jaw clench. Those rumors are wrong. I believe you, sir. But believing you and managing public perception are different things. We need to get ahead of this. Either address her presence publicly or distance yourself from her until the business situation stabilizes. Distance myself? Temporarily. Until the shareholders' meeting is resolved. After that, you can... No. The word cut through the room like a knife. His PR director blinked, clearly unused to being interrupted so forcefully. Sir, I'm not distancing myself from her. Not temporarily. Not ever. Hyun-suk rose from his chair. Find a different strategy. One that doesn't require me to treat the woman I love like an inconvenient complication. The PR director swallowed. Yes, sir. I'll explore alternatives. When the meeting ended, Hyun-suk found Chisholm in the garden, sitting on a bench beneath a cherry tree. She was wearing a simple dress, something his staff had purchased for her, since her own possessions had been lost in the crash, and she looked out of place in the manicured perfection of his estate. She also looked beautiful. Hey, he said, sitting beside her. Hey yourself. She didn't meet his eyes. How was the meeting? Productive. He paused. My PR team wants me to hide you. Oh, I told them no. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Did you? Of course I did. Chisholm, I told you. I'm not ashamed of you. I'm not going to pretend you don't exist. But your shareholders will have to accept you. If they can't, then they don't deserve my leadership. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, It's not that simple, is it? What do you mean? Your world, Hyun-suk, the way it works. She gestured at the estate surrounding them. Everything is calculated. Every relationship, every appearance, every word. It's all part of a strategy. I can see it in the way your staff looks at me. They're trying to figure out where I fit, what my angle is. You don't have an angle. I know that. You know that. But everyone else. She shook her head. They assume everyone is playing a game. And I don't know the rules. He reached for her hand. Then I'll teach you. We'll figure it out together. What if I can't learn? Her voice cracked slightly. What if I'm too different, too foreign, too much? Then we change the rules. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. I spent 40 years living by rules that someone else created. Rules that made me successful but miserable. Rules that built an empire but destroyed my humanity. I'm done with those rules. You can't just. I can. And I will. He kissed her forehead. You showed me that there's more to life than winning, Chisholm. You showed me what it feels like to be connected to another person, to be vulnerable, to love without calculating the return on investment. That's worth more than any business deal, any shareholder meeting, any corporate victory. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was smiling. You're impossible. Probably. And stubborn. Definitely. And I love you. The words hung in the air, precious and fragile. Hyun-suk felt his heart expand, filling with something that had no place in spreadsheets or strategic planning. I love you too, he said. More than I knew I was capable of. They sat together in the garden as the sun set over Seoul, two people from different worlds who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The shareholders' meeting arrived. Hyun-suk entered the grand conference room of his corporate headquarters wearing his sharpest black suit. His posture perfect, his expression unreadable. It was armor, the same armor he had worn for decades, but now it served a different purpose. Not to hide his vulnerability, but to protect it. Jin-tae was already seated at the opposite end of the table, surrounded by allies he had cultivated during the past 6 weeks. The man looked confident, but there were shadows under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. He had not taken the offered exit. He had decided to fight. So be it. The meeting began with formalities. Minutes approved, agenda reviewed, preliminary matters addressed. But everyone in the room knew why they were really there. Control of one of Asia's most powerful technology empires hung in the balance. Before we proceed to the main business, Jin-tae announced, rising to his feet, I would like to address some concerns that have been raised about Mr. Jang's fitness to resume leadership. Murmurs rippled through the room. Mr. Jang has been through a traumatic experience, Jin-tae continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. 6 weeks of isolation, extreme stress, uncertain survival. We must ask ourselves, is it in the company's best interest to return power to someone who may be psychologically compromised? Objection. One of Hyun-suk's allies called out. This is inappropriate speculation with no medical basis. I have documentation, Jin-tae countered, producing a folder. Reports from psychological experts who have assessed similar survival situations. The rate of post-traumatic stress, the incidence of impaired decision-making. You have opinions from people who have never examined Mr. Jang personally. Another ally interrupted. This is a transparent attempt to discredit a legitimate leader based on nothing but innuendo. Hyun-suk let them argue. The back and forth was expected, part of the theater that always accompanied high-stakes corporate battles. But he was waiting for the right moment to speak. It came when Jin-tae made a tactical error. Furthermore, Jin-tae said, playing what he clearly believed was a trump card. We must consider the personal choices Mr. Jang has made since his return. Choices that raise questions about his judgment. What choices would those be? Hyun-suk asked, his voice cutting through the noise. Jin-tae smiled, sensing weakness. The woman you've installed in your residence. This Nigerian flight attendant. Surely you can understand how such an association might concern shareholders who expect their leadership to maintain certain standards. The room went silent. Hyun-suk rose slowly to his feet, his gaze fixed on Jin-tae. When he spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, and absolutely lethal. Let me be clear about something. The woman you're referring to, her name is Chisholm Namani, saved my life, multiple times. While I was injured and helpless, she organized survival efforts, found water, built shelter, and maintained the morale of our group. She did this without complaint, without recognition, without any expectation of reward. He began walking toward Jin-tae, each step deliberate. While I lay on a beach unable to stand, she was tending to injured survivors. While I struggled to accept my vulnerability, she showed me what true strength looks like. While I questioned whether I would ever see home again, she gave me reasons to keep fighting. He stopped directly in front of Jin-tae, towering over the seated man. So if you think for one moment that I will tolerate disrespect toward her, in this room or anywhere else, you are gravely mistaken. She is not an association. She is not a liability. She is the woman I love, and any shareholder who has a problem with that is welcome to sell their stake. The silence that followed was absolute. Jin-tae's confident facade crumbled. He had expected Hyun-suk to be defensive about Chisholm, to treat her as a weakness to be hidden. Instead, Hyun-suk had turned the attack into a demonstration of his conviction, his humanity, his willingness to prioritize something beyond profit. The shareholders were impressed. Perhaps, one of the undecided board members said slowly, "We should move on to the vote." The vote was decisive. Hyun-suk was reinstated as chairman and CEO with a clear majority. Jin-tae's bid for permanent control was rejected. The 6 weeks of borrowed authority came to an abrupt end. Afterward, as the conference room emptied, Jin-tae approached Hyun-suk with a strained smile. "Well played," he said. "Using your romantic situation to make me look like the villain. Very clever." "There was no strategy," Hyun-suk replied. "I simply told the truth." "The truth?" Jin-tae shook his head. "You expect me to believe you've actually changed? That the ruthless businessman who built this empire has suddenly become a romantic hero? I don't care what you believe." Hyun-suk met his eyes. "My offer still stands. Take the severance package. Walk away with your reputation intact. This is the last time I'll be generous." Jin-tae's smile twisted into something uglier. "You know what I think? I think this transformation of yours is temporary. I think once the honeymoon phase ends, once reality sets in, you'll realize that love doesn't solve anything. And when that happens, I'll be waiting." He walked away without looking back, leaving Hyun-suk standing alone in the conference room. The victory was complete, but Hyun-suk couldn't shake the feeling that Jin-tae wasn't entirely wrong. Love didn't solve everything. It was just the beginning. The months that followed were a period of adjustment. Hyun-suk restructured his approach to leadership, delegating more responsibility and carving out time for things beyond work. He established regular hours, hired additional executives to share the burden, and created systems that didn't require his personal involvement in every decision. His board was skeptical at first, but the results spoke for themselves. Employee satisfaction increased. Innovation flourished. The company continued to grow, perhaps more sustainably than ever before. And Chisholm found her footing. She enrolled in business courses at a prestigious Seoul university, determined to understand the world she had entered. She began volunteering with organizations that supported African immigrants in Korea, using her experience to help others navigate cultural adjustment. She built her own identity, separate from Hyun-suk, rooted in her own strengths and values. They argued sometimes. Real arguments, not the performative conflicts of people who were afraid to show their true feelings. She challenged him when he fell into old patterns. He pushed her when she retreated from difficult situations. They grew together, sometimes painfully, always honestly. "You're different with her," Mama Ifeoma observed during one of her visits to Seoul. The elder survivor had become a regular presence in their lives, a connection to the island that had brought them together. "Softer, but not weaker. It is a good change. She makes me want to be better," Hyun-suk admitted. "I didn't know that was possible." "It is always possible, my son. Until we draw our last breath, we have the capacity to change. The question is whether we have the courage to do it." Day one had returned to flying, though he now worked only domestic routes, unwilling to travel far from his family. Sojin had moved to Busan, where she was receiving therapy for her trauma. The 5 survivors stayed in touch, their bond forged in survival transcending the differences that might have separated them in ordinary life. 1 year after the crash, Hyun-suk made a decision. He called in favors with aviation authorities. He chartered a private vessel. He contacted the other survivors and invited them to join him on a journey. They were going back to the island. The approach by sea was different from their desperate arrival a year before. The island rose from the horizon gradually, a green gem set in endless blue. As they drew closer, Hyun-suk recognized familiar landmarks. The beach where they had washed up, the ridge where they had first spotted water, the promontory where he had made his declaration to Chisholm. "It's smaller than I remembered," Chisholm said, standing beside him at the ship's railing. "Trauma does that, makes things bigger in memory." He squeezed her hand. "Are you ready?" "I don't know." She turned to face him. "Why did you want to come back?" "Really?" He hesitated. There were practical reasons. He wanted to properly memorialize those who had died, wanted to find closure for the trauma that still visited him in nightmares. But there was also something more personal, something he hadn't yet articulated. Because this place changed everything, he said finally. It stripped away who I thought I was and showed me who I could be. I needed to see it again, to remember that the person I've become is real, not just some survival-induced delusion that will fade over time. They made landfall at the same beach where they had first stumbled ashore. The survivors waded through shallow water together, their feet touching familiar sand. The lean-to was gone, destroyed by weather, but evidence of their presence remained. Scorched earth from their fires, worn paths through the vegetation, the caves where they had sheltered from the storm. Mama Ifioma led them in prayer for those who had not survived. Captain Park, the other flight attendants, the passengers whose bodies had never been recovered. They planted a simple memorial marker on the beach, its inscription facing the ocean. In memory of those lost, thee will not be forgotten. Afterward, the group dispersed to revisit sites that held personal significance. Day 1 walked the perimeter of the beach, muttering calculations about tide patterns and rescue probabilities. Sojin sat alone near the water, finally allowing herself to cry for the colleague she had watched die. Mama Ifioma settled into meditation, her lined face peaceful. Hyun-suk led Chisholm to the promontory. The climb was easier now, with healthy bodies and proper equipment. When they reached the top, the view was exactly as he remembered. The island spread out beneath them, the ocean stretching to infinity, the sky impossibly vast. "This is where you first told me you loved me," Chisholm said softly. "It is." She turned to face him, and something in his expression made her go still. "Hyun-suk, what is it?" He took her hands in his heart pounding with nervous energy. This moment, this exact moment, was why he had chartered the ship, invited the survivors, made the journey back to this forgotten place. Everything had been building to this. 1 year ago, he said, I was a man who had everything the world valued and nothing that actually mattered. I had money, power, influence, and I was completely alone. I had convinced myself that was strength, that needing people was weakness. And now I know that strength isn't about independence. It's about having the courage to depend on someone, to trust them, to let them see the parts of you that aren't perfect. He paused, steadying himself. You saw me at my worst, Chisholm. Injured, arrogant, afraid. And you stayed anyway. You challenged me to grow. You believed in someone I didn't even know existed inside myself. Hyun-suk. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. When he opened it, the diamond caught the sunlight, sending rainbows dancing across the rocks. This island is where I learned to be human again, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. This is where I fell in love with you. This is where I first imagined a future that wasn't just about winning, but about living. He knelt before her, the box held up like an offering. Chisholm Namani, you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. You are brave and kind and wise and strong. You make me want to be better every single day. I can't imagine my life without you, and I don't want to try. Tears were streaming down her face, her amber-brown eyes reflecting the vast sky behind him. Will you marry me? For a moment that lasted an eternity, she said nothing. The wind swept across the promontory, carrying the salt of the ocean and the warmth of the tropical sun. Hyun-suk remained on one knee, the ring trembling slightly in his outstretched hand. His heart exposed in a way that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Every second of silence felt like a lifetime. Then Chisholm laughed. It wasn't the reaction he had expected. It wasn't mockery or disbelief. It was joy, pure, unfiltered, radiant joy that burst from her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She laughed with her whole body, her shoulders shaking, her hands pressed against her mouth, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. You brought me back to this island, she managed between gasps of laughter. You chartered a ship. You brought everyone. You climbed this entire cliff with a ring in your pocket. Is that a yes? You ridiculous, impossible, beautiful man. Chisholm, is that a yes? She dropped to her knees in front of him, cupping his face in her hands. Her amber-brown eyes locked onto his steel-gray ones, and in that gaze was everything. Every shared meal of raw fish, every whispered conversation by dying fires, every argument that had made them stronger, every kiss that had made them whole. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. In every language I know and every language I don't. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that were shaking. Hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts without trembling. Hands that had fought off wild animals without wavering. But this moment, this fragile and magnificent moment, undid every defense he had ever built. She kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate and grateful and fierce, the kind of kiss that carried the weight of everything they had survived. The crash, the island, the ocean that had tried to swallow them, the corporate wars, the cultural barriers, the doubt and fear and loneliness that had followed them from the wreckage to this very cliff. When they finally pulled apart, Hyun-suk pressed his forehead against hers. "I was terrified you'd say no," he admitted. "Why would I say no? Because my world is difficult. Because being with me means scrutiny, pressure, expectations that no one should have to endure. Because you deserve someone who doesn't come with an empire's worth of complications." Chisholm pulled back far enough to meet his eyes. "Do you remember what Mama Ifioma said? About trees growing in groves?" "I remember. I don't want someone uncomplicated, Hyun-suk. I want someone real. Someone who has been broken and put themselves back together. Someone who knows what it costs to change and does it anyway." She touched the ring on her finger, marveling at its weight. "I want you, all of you, the billionaire and the survivor, the chairman and the man who fought a wild boar with a piece of metal. Every version." He pulled her close, holding her against his chest, and looked out over the island that had remade them both. Below, on the beach, 3 small figures moved along the shoreline. Mama Ifioma, Day-One, and Sojin, their fellow survivors, their unlikely family. "We should tell them," Chisholm said, following his gaze. "They probably already know." He smiled. "Mama Ifioma has been giving me knowing looks all week. She gives everyone knowing looks. That's her superpower." They descended the promontory together, hand in hand, moving more carefully than they had on the way up. Not because of injury or weakness, but because neither of them wanted this moment to end. Every step carried them closer to the future, and while that future was bright, the present was precious. The beach was bathed in golden afternoon light when they reached it. Mama Ifioma was the first to notice Chisholm's ring. Her eyes widened, then softened, then filled with tears that she made no attempt to hide. "Come here," the elder woman said, opening her arms. "Come here, both of you." They went to her, and she wrapped them in an embrace that smelled of sea salt and warmth and home. "I knew it," she murmured against Chisholm's hair. "From the very first night, when he watched you across the fire thinking no one could see. I knew." Day-One approached next, his expression caught between professional reserve and genuine emotion. He shook Hyun-suk's hand firmly, then surprised everyone by pulling him into a hug. "You deserve this," the pilot said quietly. "More than you know." Sojin, who had been standing apart, came forward slowly. She had changed dramatically since the crash. Therapy and time had softened the haunted look in her eyes, replacing it with a quiet resilience. She took Chisholm's hand and examined the ring, then looked up with the closest thing to a smile anyone had seen from her. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "You're beautiful together." They built a fire on the beach that night. Not for survival, not for warmth or cooking or signaling, but for celebration. They sat around the flames the way they had a year ago, but everything was different now. They were not 5 strangers fighting to stay alive. They were 5 people bound by something deeper than friendship, stronger than circumstance. Mama Ifioma told stories, as she always did. But tonight her stories were about love. The love between her late husband and herself. A love that had endured 43 years of marriage, 7 children, and countless hardships. "He was not a perfect man," she said, her eyes distant with memory. "He snored. He burned every meal he attempted to cook. He argued with market women over the price of tomatoes. She chuckled. But he loved me completely, without reservation, without condition. And when he died, I grieved not because I had lost something, but because I had been given something so precious that its absence left a space nothing else could fill. She looked at Hyun-suk and Chisholm, sitting close together on the other side of the fire. That is what you have found, she said. Do not take it for granted. Do not let the world tell you it is wrong or impossible or too different to survive. Love does not care about borders or languages or the color of skin. It only cares about the willingness of two hearts to remain open. Chisholm leaned her head against Hyun-suk's shoulder. My mother is going to love you, she told Mama Ifeoma. Of course she will. All mothers love me. I am irresistible. Laughter filled the beach, rising with the sparks from the fire and disappearing into the star-filled sky. Later, when the others had retired to the ship anchored in the bay, Hyun-suk and Chisholm remained on the beach. They lay side by side on the sand, staring up at the same stars that had watched over them during their most desperate nights. Are you scared? Chisholm asked. About what comes next? Terrified, he admitted. But not the way I used to be. I used to be scared of losing control. Now I'm scared of not being enough for you. She turned her head to look at him. You're already enough. You were enough when you were injured on this beach, unable to stand. You were enough when you couldn't catch a fish to save your life. You were enough when you burned our only cooking pot. I didn't burn. You absolutely burned it. Daewon still talks about it. He laughed, and the sound surprised him. A year ago, he hadn't been capable of genuine laughter. It had been beaten out of him by decades of corporate warfare, replaced by strategic smiles and calculated chuckles designed to put people at ease. Now he laughed because he was happy. What a remarkable thing. My mother will want a traditional engagement ceremony, Chisholm said. In Lagos, with my entire family. There will be aunties asking you invasive questions and uncles testing your patience and cousins who will definitely steal your phone to take selfies. I can handle that. And palm wine. There will be a lot of palm wine. I can handle that too. And my mother will cry. Not sad crying, happy crying. She cries at everything. Weddings, graduations, commercials about laundry detergent. She is a professional crier. I look forward to meeting her. Chisholm was quiet for a moment. Do you really? Because my world is as different from yours as yours is from mine. Lagos is not Seoul. My family's house would fit in your garage. We don't have staff or security or... Chisholm. He silenced her with a gentle hand on her cheek. I fell in love with you on a desert island where we had nothing. No houses, no cars, no money. Just each other. Do you really think I care about the size of your family's house? Her eyes glistened. No, I suppose not. Your family gave you the qualities that saved my life. Their values shaped the woman who taught me how to be human again. I owe them everything, and I haven't even met them yet. She kissed him softly. You're getting very good at saying the right thing. I had an excellent teacher. They fell asleep on the beach, wrapped in each other's arms, the ocean whispering its eternal lullaby. When they woke, the sun was rising over the island, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and the world felt new. The return to Seoul was different this time. There were no swarms of reporters, no chaotic helicopter landings. They arrived quietly, privately, and went directly to the estate. But within hours, Hyun-suk's publicist was requesting an urgent meeting. The engagement, she said, her tablet already loaded with strategy documents. We need to control the narrative before it leaks. There's nothing to control, Hyun-suk said. I'm marrying the woman I love. That's the narrative. Sir, with all due respect, it's more complicated than that. You are one of the most prominent business figures in Asia. Your fiancé is a Nigerian flight attendant with no public profile. The media will have questions. Shareholders will have concerns. Competitors will try to use this against you. Let them try. The publicist hesitated, then nodded slowly. Then we go public on your terms. A controlled statement. Professional photographs. A clear, confident message that leaves no room for speculation. Hyun-suk looked at Chisholm, who had been listening from the doorway. "What do you think?" "I think," Chisholm said, stepping into the room with a confidence that made his heart swell, "that hiding our relationship is exactly what people like Jinte would want. They want us to be ashamed. To act like what we have is something that needs to be managed." She turned to the publicist. "Don't manage us. Just tell the truth. Two people survived something terrible together and fell in love. If the world can't handle that, the world needs to grow up." The publicist stared at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time in their professional relationship, she smiled. "I like her," she told Hyun-suk. "So do I," he said. "Rather a lot." The announcement was made 3 days later. Hyun-suk released a personal statement through his company's official channels, accompanied by a single photograph of himself and Chisholm. The image showed them standing together on the grounds of his estate, his arm around her waist, her hand resting on his chest. Both were smiling, not the performative smiles of public figures, but the genuine expressions of people who had found something worth celebrating. The statement was brief. "1 year ago, I survived a plane crash that should have killed me. In the days and weeks that followed, I discovered something more valuable than anything I have ever built or acquired. I found love. Chisholm Namani is the most remarkable person I have ever known. She saved my life in more ways than I can count, and I am honored beyond words that she has agreed to become my wife. I ask for privacy as we plan our future together, and I thank everyone for their support during the most challenging year of my life." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Some of it was positive. Messages of support flooded in from around the world. Survival romance communities embraced their story. Women's magazines requested exclusive interviews. Charitable organizations invited them to speak about resilience and cross-cultural understanding. Some of it was negative. Anonymous commenters questioned Chisholm's motives. Business analysts debated the impact on shareholder confidence. Cultural purists on both sides expressed disapproval. Korean traditionalists uncomfortable with an interracial marriage. Nigerian critics suspicious of a wealthy foreign husband. Chisholm bore the scrutiny with remarkable grace. "My mother called this morning," she told Hyun-suk one evening. "She's been reading the comments online. She wanted to make sure I was okay." "Are you okay?" "I am. Mostly because she reminded me of something my grandmother used to say. The dog that barks at the moon does not diminish its light." Hyun-suk smiled. "I like your grandmother. You would have loved her. She had opinions about everything and apologized for nothing." Chisholm paused. "My mother also said she wants to meet you, properly, before the wedding. Then we'll go to Lagos." Just like that. Just like that. They flew to Lagos 3 weeks later. Hyun-suk had traveled extensively throughout his career. Tokyo, London, New York, Dubai. But nothing had prepared him for the energy of Lagos. The city hit him like a physical force the moment they stepped off the plane. Heat, noise, color, movement. Everything turned up to maximum, a sensory overload that would have overwhelmed the old version of himself. The new version found it exhilarating. Chisholm's family home was in a modest neighborhood in the Surulere area. A 2-story building with a small courtyard, laundry hanging from the windows, and the sound of music drifting from every direction. It was, as Chisholm had warned, approximately the size of his garage. It was also the warmest place he had ever been. Her mother, Mrs. Grace Namani, was waiting at the door. She was a small woman with Chisholm's amber-brown eyes and a smile that could have powered a city. The moment she saw her daughter, she burst into tears, the professional crying that Chisholm had described, and pulled her into an embrace that lasted several minutes. Then she turned to Hyun-suk. She studied him with the careful, unflinching assessment of a mother evaluating her daughter's chosen partner. She took in his height, his posture, his clothes, his expression. She noted the way he held Chisholm's hand, the way his body angled slightly toward her daughter, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. "So," Mrs. Namani said, "you are the one who wants to marry my Chisholm?" "Yes, ma'am. They say you are a very rich man." "I am. They say you are powerful." That people are afraid of you. Some people are, yes. Are you a good man? The question was simple but loaded. Hyun-suk considered it carefully. I am trying to be, he said honestly. Your daughter is helping me. Mrs. Namani studied him for another long moment. Then she nodded and opened her arms. Welcome to our family, she said, pulling him into a hug that was surprisingly strong for such a small woman. You are too thin. Come inside. I will feed you. Over the next week, Hyun-suk was absorbed into the Namani family with a thoroughness that left no room for isolation. Chisholm's brothers, 3 of them, ranging from teenagers to young adults, immediately adopted him as a source of endless fascination. They asked about his cars, his houses, his business strategies. The youngest, Emmanuel, challenged him to a video game tournament and beat him decisively 7 times in a row. Aunties appeared in waves, each one bringing food and questions in equal measure. They wanted to know about his family, his health, his intentions, and his ability to produce grandchildren. They did not wait for answers before offering opinions. Uncles tested his patience with elaborate stories, political debates, and repeated offers of palm wine that grew more insistent with each refusal. And through it all, Mrs. Namani watched. She watched how he treated her daughter, with respect, affection, and attentiveness. She watched how he responded to her sons, with patience and genuine interest. She watched how he handled the chaos of a Nigerian family gathering, not with the stiff discomfort of a man out of his depth, but with the growing ease of someone learning to swim in unfamiliar waters. On the last night of their visit, Mrs. Namani found Hyun-suk alone on the courtyard balcony. The sounds of Lagos surrounded them. Car horns, music, the distant call of a muezzin, children laughing in the street below. You love her, Mrs. Namani said. It was not a question. More than anything, she told me about the island, about what you went through together. She was quiet for a moment. I almost lost my daughter. Every day for 6 weeks I believed she was dead. I grieved for her. I buried her in my heart. Her voice broke, but she continued. And then she came back to me, changed, stronger, in love with a man from the other side of the world. She looked at him. When a mother's child returns from the dead, she does not ask why or how. She simply gives thanks. I will take care of her, Hyun-suk said. I promise you that. I know you will. Mrs. Namani placed her hand on his arm, the same gesture he realized that Mama Ifeoma used. Perhaps it was a universal language, this maternal touch. But I want you to understand something. Chisholm does not need taking care of. She never has. What she needs is a partner, an equal, someone who stands beside her, not in front of her. I understand. Do you? Because in your world, the world of money and power, it is very easy to believe that providing for someone is the same as loving them. It is not. Providing is a gift of the hands. Loving is a gift of the heart. Chisholm needs your heart, Mr. Jang. She needs you to be present, to be honest, to be vulnerable. She taught me that, he said. On the island, she taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness. Mrs. Namani smiled, the same radiant smile her daughter had inherited. Then perhaps you are worthy of her after all. She kissed his cheek and went inside, leaving him alone with the sounds of Lagos and the knowledge that he had been accepted. The wedding took place 6 months later. It was held in 2 ceremonies, one in Lagos, one in Seoul, because some things are too important to be celebrated only once. The Lagos ceremony was a traditional Nigerian engagement, complete with the rituals and customs that had been practiced for generations. Hyun-suk, coached extensively by Chisholm's family, participated with genuine enthusiasm. He prostrated himself before the elders. He presented kola nuts to the family. He drank palm wine without grimacing, though it took every ounce of his considerable willpower. Mrs. Namani cried throughout the entire ceremony. As promised, the Seoul ceremony was different, elegant, refined, infused with Korean traditions that honored Hyun-suk's heritage. Chisholm wore a hanbok that had been specially designed for her, the traditional Korean dress adapted to complement her deep brown skin and natural curls. She was stunning, and when Hyun-suk saw her walking toward him, He had to look away for a moment to compose himself. Mama Ifeoma attended both ceremonies. Dae-won served as Hyun-suk's best man in Seoul, his pilot's composure cracking only slightly during his speech. So-jin, healthy and smiling, caught the bouquet and blushed furiously. The media covered the Seoul ceremony extensively. Billionaire weds island love read the headlines. But the couple had made their peace with public scrutiny. Their love was not a performance. It did not require validation from strangers. It existed independently, rooted in survival and trust and the slow, deliberate choice to remain open. On their wedding night, in the penthouse suite of a Seoul hotel, Hyun-suk found himself standing at the window, looking out at the city he had once ruled with cold efficiency. Chisholm came to stand beside him, her reflection joining his in the glass. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking about a man who woke up on a beach a year and a half ago. A man who couldn't stand, who was angry and afraid and completely alone." He turned to face her. "I barely recognize him. He's still in there." She touched his chest, right over his heart. The drive, the determination, the stubbornness that borders on pathological. Those things haven't changed. No, but their purpose has. What's their purpose now? He covered her hand with his own. "You. Building something that actually matters." She smiled, that warm, radiant, world-altering smile that had first broken through his defenses on a forgotten island in the Pacific. "Then I'd say the crash was worth it," she said. "Every terrifying second." They stood together at the window, two people from different worlds who had built a new world between them. Below, Seoul pulsed with life. Millions of people pursuing their own stories, their own struggles, their own improbable love affairs. And above, the same stars that had once watched over a deserted island now watched over them. Some things are destroyed so that better things can be built. Some walls must fall so that hearts can connect. Some planes must crash so that two people who were never supposed to meet can find each other on a forgotten shore and discover that love, real love, the kind that survives disaster and distance and every obstacle the world can throw at it, is not found in luxury or power or control. It is found in vulnerability, in trust, in the simple, terrifying, magnificent act of letting someone see who you really are. Jang Hyun-suk had built an empire that spanned continents. But the greatest thing he ever built was a life with Chisholm Namani. And it started with a crash.